So a young guy by the name of Jordan Lambs flew into Salt Lake City, and we coordinated a time for us to speak about medical cannabis coming to Utah. And if you're listening to this in March 2020, we are just a couple weeks away from Cannabis Pharmacies opening in Utah. I wanted to speak to Jordan in particular because he's been in the industry for 10 years, despite him being very young. I think he's about 30 years old. But he has an internationally recognized company called Moxie. According to High Times Magazine, Jordan is one of the most influential, 100 most influential people in medical cannabis. He is driven to be an advocate for accessible, standardized, pharmaceutical-grade cannabis products. He takes his job very seriously. Lamb's leadership has driven Moxie from a self-financed startup to an international enterprise with facilities in, I believe, 6 states and 40 countries, where he works to ensure emerging markets are regulated safely and responsibly. And that's really what he's done here in Utah. He's helped change the laws. He's helped usher in greater acceptance and buy-in to the medical cannabis industry among our state legislature. He said they're quickly changing their laws. They're quickly adapting. It's really interesting to talk to Jordan because of how things were about a year and a half ago and how much resistance and pushback we were getting in introducing medical cannabis to Utah from I should say, the state legislature run by the Mormon Church, to how things have drastically changed today, which he explains is due to them not wanting to get sued. This was a very interesting conversation. It's kind of short, but I wanted to get a sense of how much he was in it for the money and how much he was in it for the passion. And I really got a good sense that Mr. Lambs Jordan was in it for his passion. So without further ado, my conversation with Jordan Lambs. One of the very few cannabis license owners in Utah, and he was, according to High Times, one of the most influential people in cannabis. He has operations that he's built out in places such as Florida, New Jersey. I had a full list. Is it Texas, Michigan, Pennsylvania? Is that right?
And California, Nevada.
California, Nevada, yeah. So I'm really happy to have him on the show to talk about cannabis coming to Utah. It's an exciting time.
It is. Thanks for having me, Rich. Really stoked to be here.
Yeah. So how and why did you choose to come and expand into Utah?
A number of different factors. One, our roots in the space and my roots in the space come from the medical side. So new medical programs are important to us, even if we don't become operators, because we just want to have, the opportunity to share our experiences and help develop these programs in a way that's really great for both business and, of course, primarily the patients. And what we saw in Utah was not only a regulatory framework that was set up to do just that, but also stakeholders involved in the process who really had their hearts in the right place. And working with the Department of Ag and the Department of Health throughout the process, it's validated that. And we think that, this is going to be a successful market that's going to bring pretty awesome value into people's lives.
Yeah, and if I understand right, you are vertically integrated. You'll both be growing and selling?
No, actually, we're just a pharmacy license holder, and
okay.
we have a processing license pending.
Okay. So your goal is to be able to process your own product, though, right?
Correct. Yeah, we would like to be able to procure biomass from the various cultivators and turn that into several different terminal products, such as vape pens or edibles or capsules or topicals, tinctures, etc.
Cool. So we started covering here at Utah Stories medical cannabis coming to Utah about a year and a half ago. And it's been quite a ride to see how the state legislature has rolled this out, and in such a terrible fashion, I have to say. Like that original compromise bill they wrote, I don't know how anybody could possibly navigate through that to figure out what you got to do to get your license. How did you go about doing that?
It's not our first rodeo, luckily. So the intricacies are ones that we have some familiarity with and dealing with. And despite, the imperfection that ultimately exists in every new program, the agility of the legislature and the regulators here in Utah is honestly second to none. A bottleneck is identified, and they address it head on and really work through it. Now, there's still a number of things that really need to be looked at and addressed, but the dialogue, the cadence and the narrative that's occurring amongst the license holders and the regulators and the legislators has been frankly, one of the better experiences we've had in a new market coming online. So
Wow.
it's always going to be imperfect, but I think we're really headed in the right direction here.
Well, that's encouraging, because I just thought when I saw that legislation, what a shit show this would be to try to navigate this.
It's challenging for sure, but it's getting better all the time, I think, is
I
the
guess
sentiment.
that's the key. I mean, they passed that knowing that it was absolutely unviable, and they just needed a stepping stone to start with, and I guess it's gotten a lot better, huh?
100%.
So there were quite a few people I talked to that did not get the cultivator licenses or the medical cannabis licenses. Tell me, what is it that set you guys apart that you think made you a viable choice to be getting one of the rare licenses?
It's always really hard to say. We did apply for a cultivation license and we did not receive it. We scored 12th out of the original 10 that were supposed to be issued, and then only 8 were actually issued. So we got close, and why we didn't make it compared to some of the others is anyone's guess. Similarly to the pharmacy license, I think one thing that we did is we identified that there is going to be an underserved part of the population here in these rural regions, and so kind of going where people weren't focusing as much because it's not the best business case made sense to us, because we could differentiate that, like, hey, we're really here just to provide value to as many people as possible, even if that is in more of a logistically challenging region. And I think that the state identified with that. And then we do have a track record of doing this for a number of years, and it's very personal to us. It's deeply personal to us.
Yeah, when I started looking at it, examining the issue at the beginning, we have a lot of amazing farmers in Utah. We love to grow things homegrown. We love to have more self-reliance and not rely on outside entities and interests to take care of things for us. Why do you think this is just not proven to be a viable market for traditional farmers at all?
We say this all the time internally in the company. Looking into the cannabis industry, everybody thinks that this is just, the Wild West of easy money and growth. And the reality is that it's really hard. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a very tough industry. In fact, in speaking to a lot of my peer groups within the space that come from other industries, very highly successful people, all of them with, 100% consensus agree that this is the hardest thing they've ever had to do, from the regulations to actually developing the products to always maintaining the cognizance of that these are people's lives that you're impacting. It's a challenge. And then you have the whole federal illegality that we're still dealing with, and the way that the tax code is applied to this industry. Every little thing is harder than it needs to be. So it's one of those things where you have to have that direct, specific skill set and experience and know-how for it to work. And I think that is partially why, too, the state looked to outside influence. Because if you look to some markets where they really tried to control it to local residents, Colorado being an excellent example, it really stuttered at the beginning. Whereas if you can accelerate the timetable by bringing in that expertise from the outside, you're ultimately getting to the end goal faster, which is very important when you're talking about people's health and wellness.
Yeah. Yeah, the only detriment I see into that model is it's like we know this is going to be a huge economic generator, and if a lot of those dollars are going outside of our local economy, that's not as good as if we could somehow manage to do it on our own. But so you say that Colorado was tried to do much more local cultivation, and they just didn't succeed at it?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that they didn't allow was outside of the state ownership up until just this last year. And so what that prevented was not only, outside skill sets that had deeper experience to come in, but even more than that, this is a highly capital intensive industry. It costs a lot of money just to get out of bed and put the key in the door every day. So when you limit the dollars to just what's within the four corners of the state, while there is great wealth within each state, it's a much smaller pool of capital than being able to aggregate funds from all over the world ultimately. Yeah. So, and at the end of the day, again, this is a patient focused program. People are dying that need access to this. So if the difference is economic benefit to locals versus saving lives, I know which one I pick.
And so your goal from the beginning has been to produce pharmaceutical grade medical cannabis. What does that mean exactly?
So the processes that we use and the equipment that we use is stuff that you would see in, a big pharmaceutical company. Now, that being said, I don't want to downplay the true medicinal nature of the plant in its raw form. But when you're talking about medicine and ultimately adopting a whole new populace of physicians that don't have the experience with the product, you have to move a little bit towards, people's understanding of the way that the paradigm of healthcare works traditionally. So to be able to produce something that could be understood on a per milligram basis to understand dosing, that's helpful. Additionally, by implementing processes like that, you're able to provide a broader assortment. And I think a huge component of the healing element of cannabis is actually that process of self-discovery. We're used to, in healthcare, a doctor prescribing one drug for everyone with that ailment. And I think if that was really truly the most effective way to treat each individual person, we probably wouldn't have medical cannabis to begin with, because we've had Marinol and Dronabinol for 40 plus years at this point. And the reality is that the efficacy of those drugs are not as good as the anecdotal evidence you hear of people just even inhaling combusted cannabis. So it's a paradigm shifter ultimately, that we need to provide as many options as possible so that people can figure out what works for them, because everyone deserves that individualized attention.
Yeah, I want to get back to that. Marinol, Dronabinol, what are those?
So those are synthetic, synthesized versions of THC.
Oh, okay.
And so they've been available since the 70s for cancer patients for as an antiemetic for treating nausea. And the deep irony for that is that when prescribed for nausea, oftentimes it exacerbates it because of the way that it's ingested, the fact that it's not natural, whereas someone that's going through chemotherapy, for instance, that actually inhales cannabis can get literally instantaneous relief.
Yeah.
It's so measurable that you see it for one time in your own personal life with your family or someone that you love, a friend, and it's undeniable.
Yeah. Well, what I especially like about the vertical integration model is if you have the availability to the plant and the genetics and the patients, and you can get the feedback from the patients as to what genetics are functional, that's an incredible feedback loop that they just don't offer at drug companies. I mean, one single drug can take 10 to 15 years to develop before they fully understand what the major side effects are. And so do you think that will become a new model where the geneticists working in the botany of the plants are directly hearing from the patients working in this, or benefiting from the same plants that they're growing?
It does actually exist that way today, and in the vertical markets where you get that closer proximity to the feedback loop, as you mentioned, it is a lot more effective. In markets like California, where we only have a limited amount of vertical integration direct to the consumer, getting that feedback and iterating off of it is a little bit more challenging. And the irony here is that actually in the pharmaceutical world, that it does exist. You only have to get through a phase 3 to get your FDA approval for a new drug, but there is what's called phase 4, which is the translational component of studying a drug, which is after it goes to market. But when you figure pharmacy or pharma is big business, that's a lot of costs that ultimately are unnecessary and superlative. So oftentimes they're not elected.
Yeah. So you personally saw the impact of using medical cannabis for PTSD, and what was the impact it had on your life?
I mean, complete 180, quite frankly. I suffered from PTSD from traumatic experiences as a child. I witnessed my sister for the majority of my childhood suffer from leukemia and do everything that you do to try and save a loved one, including pumping them full of all sorts of toxic chemicals and radiation and all of the awful things that does to a little kid. And having also been working full time since I was 14 years old, very quickly I got to a point of burnout. I was not sleeping, I was not eating, I was working really hard, and I just was completely imbalanced, and it was not sustainable. And it took someone who really cared about me to convince me that I needed to make up my own mind, not trust what I had been taught my entire life, to actually go through my own process of self-discovery, learning about what it can do, what other people have experienced from it, and then trying it for the first time myself. And it brought that balance back. It brought my appetite back. I slept. I was a person again. I was a shell of a human before.
You were working full time at 14 years old?
I'm an interesting cookie, I guess. I walked into a sporting goods store at 14 years old and basically told them, you need to hire me because of X, Y, and Z. And they were like, okay. And so, I'm kind of one of those people that gets bored quickly if I'm sitting still. So, So cannabis hasn't changed that. Still hyperactive.
So you didn't go to school. You just started working when you were 14.
No, I was going to school as well. I went to my school and got a work permit at 14 and continued through. And I went to school after high school, but I went to go and do music because I didn't see cannabis as a viable career path at that point. But I always joke I didn't choose it; it chose me. That's for sure.
Huh. That's cool. So with all of these people who would like to obtain cultivator licenses or medical cannabis pharmacy licenses, what kind of suggestions might you have for them?
You got to get a great team. I mean, no one can do this on their own. That's the reality here. I know how overextended for bandwidth I feel on a daily basis just because of how much complexity there is to accomplish everything you have to in this world. And even with a broad team, everyone always feels like, there's still something to be done. So you got to surround yourself with, real professionals that understand what it is that you need to accomplish, but moreover have a deep commitment to the reason why. And it shines through all the way to the customer through product quality, customer service, and ultimately even I think to regulators. We show up in a market not first and foremost to win a license, but first and foremost to help make sure that the program is successful so that people get the relief that they deserve. And if you can stay focused on that, our mantra, our belief is that everything else falls into place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it made me quite happy to see that the priorities of our state legislature shifted to the patient need, because had they gone with their original model, the priority would have been obviously state control over patient need. And so what kind of model do you see as being the most viable in getting the most access to the most patients?
It's I'd say it's so early in the industry while it's, been going on for such a long time, 10 years in Colorado and, over 20 in California. There's no perfect way to do it. I think from protecting the economies of scale and ensuring a sustainability of growth, you have to have limited licensure. In the markets where they've issued licenses to everyone, you end up with bad actors, you end up with oversupply, and ultimately you end up with low quality, which impacts the patient the most. Low prices sound good, but if you're not getting something that actually is providing the relief, then who's winning in that circumstance? And allowing some amount of vertical integration is important, but you don't want it to be completely isolated to vertical integration, because again, having that assortment, that breadth of offering is important to ensure that you can reach and impact more people. Whereas if you're isolated to just what you can produce, not everyone can do everything, and not everyone can be all things to all people. So it's kind of a combination of everything that we've seen throughout the various states, which is frankly a nice amalgamation of what we're seeing here in Utah.
Yeah, and limited licensure, that whole aspect of it, I was originally a critic of, because it turns it into something like a lottery. And the ones who obviously have been winning the lottery are these out-of-state interests who've done it before and know how to do it really well. But what is it about limiting the number of licenses that really improves the quality from your standpoint?
Well, you get players that have been successful in other places because, again, this is so capital intensive. If this is your first rodeo and you're trying to raise millions of dollars to execute a business plan, that's challenging for investors to buy into unless you have a track record. And that being said as well, there needs to be a competitive element to that, but there also has to be balance between supply and demand. And what you don't want to have happen is the imbalance in favor of excess supply, because then you end up in a zero-sum game of price warring where everybody's just fighting for shelf space and they start cutting corners. Whereas if there's a healthy balance of business and patient care, you can actually have the best of both worlds. Because ultimately businesses have to make money to stay in business. That's just the way the world works, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it being so capital intensive, I know you're part of Consortium, which is a holding company. Is that part of Moxie as a brand, or is that a different outside holding company that helps you get financing for what you're doing? Or
so Consortium is actually a company in which we've invested into, and that's our partner in the Florida market. Our parent company is Moxie, which is the brand name under which we sell products in the various states that you mentioned prior. But we have a separate parent company that owns all of our assets, and we've raised money for various projects through that vehicle.
Okay, and is it mostly venture capital? That's
not a ton of venture capital. It's a lot of international investors at this point. A lot of the money in the space has come in through Canada because they have been a lot more of a forward thinker on cannabis in general, as well as allowing access to the capital markets for companies to go public and access institutional investment. And that being said, while it's happening, it's still very, very minimal comparative to what will happen once the United States opens up.
Oh, yeah. But what was the process that you went through starting out as an individual with a passion and really small to growing into the size that you are today? Like, how did you develop that?
How much time you got? Huh? It's been a movie. I mean,
How many years ago did you start?
I've been in the business. This is my 12th year. So
Wow, that's a long
I've been
time.
from long before it was a cool thing to do, all the way to now where it's really starting to actually, mature and get some adulthood to it. And I think it's still actually probably closer to adolescence at this point. But honestly, some of the stories I could tell you, you likely wouldn't believe.
So what was the inflection point for you when you were finally able to access the capital you needed to expand?
Again, it's about the right team.
Yeah.
Having the right team internally and externally. We've been very lucky and serendipitous, I believe. Truly that the stars have to align for things to work out right in anything, let alone a space as complex as this. But we're very blessed to have a team of operators and passionate boots on the ground, as well as upper level management that has a depth of experience from the pharmaceutical space, as well as in finance. And then we have a couple investment banker advisors that are just, they're ninjas. They get it done because they believe in it and they believe in us. And that's a truly humbling thing to be a part of.
Cool. So you were just a kid growing it, I suppose, and then you surrounded yourself with these great people, and obviously you're very competent yourself, and that was what made the difference, huh?
Making the difference every day. The thing is, you're never done, right? This is a constant battle. Every single day you have to get up and fight harder than you did yesterday, to do the right thing, to stay relevant, to stay in business. This is a highly competitive space. Everybody wants a part of it. To illustrate, why it is this big opportunity is in the last 50 years, it's the second fastest growing industry, only second to the internet. So
Really?
that should put it into scope for you.
Jeez.
And, to be, frankly, the little kid in the sea of suits and ties and gangsters and sick people, you got to really stay focused. And I think that's one thing that we've done pretty well is really maintain our commitment to what matters and, frankly, to our lane, understanding where we have a core competency and focusing on that ultimately.
Yeah. So your headquarters is in LA, and how many people do you have working for you?
Somewhere just south of 200 total head count today. Yep, and our headquarters are in LA, but we've got offices all over the place. And so we always joke that really headquarters is the Delta Lounge, because we're always on an airplane. We're always moving around to the next meeting or to the next thing.
Or through the next snowstorm to Vernal, Utah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, you're going to be having your shop opening in Vernal, Utah. When is it going to be opening doors?
So we're still working with the Department of Health on location and timing. We've been doing significant analysis on the data of where to locate the stores so that we can serve the largest population base within the rural region. And I'd say that we're getting very close to knowing exactly what that will be and when that will be. But it's still an ongoing dialogue. And I got to give great credit to the Department of Health for being very dynamic and understanding that, it's not going to be exactly perfect day one, and we have to have a partnership with them to determine how we can provide the most good to the state.
Yeah. Well, thanks for filling us in. It's been a tricky thing to cover as a single journalist. There's so many players and actors, like you said, and it's supposed to be in March that we start to see the first medical cannabis pharmacies come online. Do you know which ones are actually going to be fully operational?
I've heard that there will be one opening here in Salt Lake on March 1st, but the details are still a bit murky.
Yeah, I've got a list here that says there are potentially 3 opening in Salt Lake. The one that I know the best is the Dragonfly Wellness on 717 South State, and there's one a Beehive's Own, which is 1991 South and 3600 West. And I would say check the utahstories.com website. At this time, we will definitely research that topic and get back to our readers and listeners and let them know what's opening up and when. But it's exciting. You think by maybe June, July, you have any?
I think by June, July, we should be in full swing here in the market. What's going to determine the rate at which these stores open will be the adoption rate of physicians and then their rate of prescribing to patients. And, that's something that's always projected prior to the engagement of a new marketplace. And it's always a little different than everyone expects. So we'll start to see here pretty quickly, as I believe we heard today that there's already 40 qualified medical practitioners that are registered with the state, of which if anyone out there is interested in finding one of these providers to speak to, you can go to the Department of Health website, and they're listed for them to be contacted.
Oh, great. We'll set up that link. Any other advice you'd have for patients or well, patients, people who are wanting to get access in Utah?
Not so much advice as I think encouragement. We've had the opportunity to meet with a number of the grower processors, as well as actually see the 2 locations that you mentioned that are on the slate to open pretty soon here today. And not only are the locations incredible, going to be very easy to access for patients from a parking standpoint, but I believe that the in-store experience is going to be very high quality. And then the product quality that we've seen for the first shot blew our minds today. We're incredibly excited. There's actually going to be really great stuff out the gate for patients to have access to.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. No more driving to Colorado.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show, Jordan. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Rich. Thank you.
Go and visit and book your next rafting trip adventure at Sherry Griffith River Expeditions in Moab. So a few years ago, I went on the Yampa River with Sherry Griffith, and I was truly blown away by how attentive and amazing their guides were. Every single detail was accounted for, including gourmet meals every night for dinner, amazing lunches, and just an amazing spirit of camaraderie and friendship on the river. Their guides are incredible, and I highly recommend you don't do just a 1-day or 2-day. Check out their 5-day trips. You will not regret it. It will be an adventure of a lifetime. You can go to Cataract Canyon, Labyrinth Canyon, the Grand. Go visit them now and book your next summer trip at griffithexp.com. That's griffithexp.com, or Google Sherry Griffith, and their site will pop up and you can see all the amazing adventures you can tap into there. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by the Made in Utah Brewers Fest. So we're coming right up on our initial ticket increase. We have released, without much publicity, $5 tickets, which are going extremely fast. When you're probably listening to this, those are probably gone, but just $10 for a ticket for our Brewers Fest is about one of the best brewery fest prices you will find anywhere. It's because we want the experience to be enjoyed by 4,000 people, 4,000 lucky people this year. We were completely sold out last year. We have a much bigger space. We have looks like 10 to 15 breweries who are participating, and it was such an amazing party last year. We had bands, we dressed up in our lederhosen. The whole thing lasts only like 5 hours, so it's an intense, amazing experience to enjoy all the best of Utah craft beer. Go visit madeinutahfest.com to get your ticket. It's not until May 9th when we have the actual event, but it's certainly, the tickets are already moving very quickly. So I encourage you to go to madeinutahfest.com right now and reserve your spot at our 2nd annual Utah Brewers Fest.